like to start off our second week of our UX Research Challenge. My name is Esther. I'm a volunteer here at IterateUX creative team. We are focused on bringing UX challenge to the platform. Okay, so our speaker today is Yagmur Erten. She is a senior UX researcher at BuzzFeed, and she will be speaking about how to plan and conduct user interviews and usability tests. Very important. So just to give a quick intro to IterateUX, we are an open virtual Discord community that helps UXers learn, connect, and grow in their careers. People of all experience levels are welcome to join, and it is not limited to just designers. In IterateUX, we offer sessions and events on Discord, such as portfolio reviews and challenges to help you build your skills. There are weekly events where we hold virtual meetups like this with guest speakers who share their expertise and industry experience in various UX-related topics. We also have portfolio reviews, resume reviews, where you can get one-on-one feedback to help you gain some insights and improve your portfolio. Finally, we hold design feedback, coffee chat sessions, design challenges, whiteboard challenges, and mock-up interviews to help you level up in your UX career. So before we begin, I would also just like you to stay muted and during the presentation, but feel free to unmute yourself when you want to share something, especially during the Q&A session at the end of today's talk. Secondly, make sure to use the chat box throughout this meeting and share your questions and comments so that we can bring them up during the question and answer section. Okay. Our virtual meetings are held every Thursday at 5:30 Pacific time. So feel free to check that out, as well as join our Discord channel where you can start conversations or find information through the IterateUX community. In the chat box, Padma is going to, if she hasn't already, share some of her links. If you like to become a mentor or a volunteer, feel free to click those links to sign up. Also, there are links for networking, so please be sure to share what you've gained and learned through IterateUX on your social media. So, you know, the event that's going on today, this workshop, feel free to share that in your social media, get the word out. If you would like to leave us some feedback, feel free to fill out our survey for our future events and share your insights so that we can create even better content moving forward. This is our donation page on the IterateUX website. And if you like what we do here, please support us by donating on Ko-fi. This will keep our services going and help us improve IterateUX. All of us are volunteers at IterateUX, so every donation goes straight in helping the IterateUX community. Any amount will be greatly appreciated. Just to give you a quick heads up, our next week's workshop will be on Monday, November 7th at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be on quick tips on qualitative note-taking, and our speaker will be Jen Fast. On Thursday next week, we will have speaker Purnima Solanki, sorry, I'm butchering the name, analyzing user data to create persona and map user journey. So that will be the next third workshop on Thursday, next Thursday at 5:30 Pacific time. Okay, so now I want to turn the floor to today's speaker. So let's go ahead and give a warm welcome to Yagmur. So thank you, everyone, and let's get the event started.
My name is Yagmur. As Esther mentioned, I'm a senior UX researcher at BuzzFeed. I've been in the UX research field for 6-7 years right now. And today I'll be going through how to plan and conduct user interviews and usability tests. If you have any questions, feel free to write them down on the chat box or keep them to yourself to ask to me at the end of this entire presentation. Some of your questions might get answered as I'm going through the presentation, so that's why I would like to keep them until the end to answer them. And I'll be also sharing the link of this presentation later on in the Discord channels, as well as this chat here right before we hang up. So you'll have access to all the resources that I am linking in this presentation. All right, to get started, let me hide this. Okay, how to plan and conduct user interviews and usability tests. So I'll start with the research planning. So because to conduct usability tests and user interviews, you need to make sure that you have a strong, solid user research plan that directs you and guides you to conducting and using those methodologies with participants. So we'll start with what research plan is and how to prepare a research plan. What is a research plan? It is a guideline, document that helps you communicate with your stakeholders about your research objectives, background, the questions, the methods, the timeline, the budget, the session guide, the script that you're going to use. So it helps the teams to align on, to be on the same page on about the research project throughout the entire timeline. They can come back and refer to it. It will also help you to ensure that your research is progressing according to your objectives. You're actually following your research questions. You're actually on the same page of your stakeholders. So it is a document that is basically guiding you throughout your entire research process. And I will be sharing an example of a research plan later on, so you'll be able to easily visualize what research plans look like as well. To first start, how to prepare one. A good research plan includes these 7 sections. Plus you can add more sections depending on your organizations and your stakeholders' needs. Sorry, I got a chat. Oh, sorry. So the good research plan includes a background, an objective, research question sections, methodology, participant and recruitment, timeline and budget, and session guides. We will go through each of them right now. What is the background information in a research plan? At the beginning of a research plan documentation, it's really essential to highlight why you're conducting the research. Like, what is the problem space? Why this research is necessary? It is for your benefit as well as for anyone who might not be familiar with that research project at that time of the part where you're conducting it, coming back to your research plan and exploring why you did this research project, what was happening with your company, what was happening with the product that required this research project. For example, a background could look like this. 90% of our users engage with our content without creating or signing into their accounts. Therefore, they're missing out on the features that are only available to account owners. We want to understand why our users do not prefer to have an account when using our product, and how might we motivate them to create and sign into their accounts when they visit our product. So this could be an example of what background in a research plan can look like, explaining what the problem space is and what is happening with the product that leads to research. In terms of research objectives highlight what you want to learn, what you want to accomplish with this research based on the problem statement that you wrote in the background statement. Since this section will guide the rest of the research plan, it's very important to plan a good ahead of time, collaborate with stakeholders, just spend good amount of time on objectives to make sure that you have solid objectives, because that's what's going to guide the entire research plan, including the research questions, including the methodology that you'll select, the participant criteria you select, etc. So it's important to collaborate with stakeholders at this stage and write a good, solid objective section in the research plan. For example, an objective section could look like that. We want to better understand why our users prefer to consume our content without an account. We also want to discover channels to motivate our users to create accounts and how they feel about the features we offer to account owners. So here we have 2 main objectives. It's understanding why our users prefer to consume our content without an account. And again, discovering how to motivate them to create accounts and how they feel about those features that we offer only to account owners. Like, are they enough motivating? So in this example, we wrote only 2 objectives, but you can have as many as you and your stakeholders decided to have. For research questions, the research questions, like each step as we are going through these sections in a research plan, objective is guided by the background. Research questions are guided by the objective. Methodology is guided by the research questions, and so on and so forth. So each step is very important in terms of guiding and giving you an idea on how to prepare the next section of your research plan. So coming to the research questions, you want to get answers to these questions based on the objectives that you defined earlier. So as you can see on this chart, each research objective will have research questions regarding what that objective wants you to explore with that research. It's important to know here that the research questions are not the questions that you'll ask to your participants. These research questions are the ones that you want to communicate with the stakeholders about. These are the answers that I'm going to get you with this research. We are going to explore how the users consume content on our product with this research. We're not going to ask this question like this to the users, but we are going to ask questions to users that's going to help us explore how the users consume content on our product. What barriers the users face when consuming content on our product? What concerns do they have? What actions do they want to take? So these are some examples of the research questions. Again, these are not the questions that you'll be asking to your participants. These are the ones that you are promising your team and your stakeholders that I'm going to get you answers with this research for this research questions. Moving on to the methodology. In the methodology section, you'll be discussing which methodology you chose based on the research questions and the objectives that you defined with the stakeholders, and why you chose this methodology over others, why it wasn't any other, why did you choose a generative research versus evaluative research, which we'll get to it in a minute what they mean. So, for example, you can write moderated remote interviews, be selected one-on-one, 30 to 45-minute sessions. This will help us better discuss users' wants, needs, motivation, and answer our research questions. So explain it briefly, not without going into too much detail about what that methodology is, but explain it briefly, like how this methodology fits and the most appropriate for the research plan and research that you are conducting at that stage, and give as much information as you can in terms of, like, is it a remote one? Is it a moderated one? Is it one-on-one? How much time are you going to spend in each session, etc. So this way your stakeholders can understand what you're going to do to get to those answers, to those research questions that you came to conclusion with. In terms of participant and recruitment, in this step, you are supposed to explain how many participants you're going to have in your study, what are your criteria and demographics, and how to plan and recruit for participants. If you have a screening survey, you can attach it here as well. Again, I will share an example of a screening survey template with you later on. But what participant and recruitment section can look like is you can write the number of participants. You can explain why you chose this many participants. You can also link it to an article that explains your stakeholders, like, this is why this many participants are appropriate for this research and this methodology. What are the criteria? For example, regular app users that visit the app at least 3 times, that don't have an account, that like to read about celebrity news. Like, what are your criteria? Again, these criteria can be discussed and decided in collaboration with your stakeholders. You're not expected to decide them by yourself. Go talk to your stakeholders and ask them, like, who do you think are target users for us? Like, who do we want to explore this research for? So you can also come up with some demographic criteria as well, like lives in the US, live in urban cities, 25, like, you don't have to have all these demographic criteria, but the more you have, the more targeted users and participants you will have in your research. So discuss it with your stakeholders, how much narrow they want to get with this research, and who do we want to hear answers to these research questions that we discussed from. And then in this section, again, explain the recruitment, like, how are you going to recruit your participants? For example, we'll share our screener with our current users via email, because we have our current users' emails, but it could be new users, potential users. It could be you might be using a third-party website such as responded.io or usertesting.com to recruit participants, which is a bit more expensive way of recruiting participants, since you are paying the third party to recruit it for you, but it is a faster way. But if you don't have enough budget, you can also share your screener in appropriate Facebook, Slack, LinkedIn groups. For example, if you're targeting dog owners, you can join dog owner Facebook groups and share your screener there by asking the admin if you can share it, or LinkedIn and Slack groups as well. Depends on how much budget you have, which we'll get to it in a bit, explain how to recruit, and how much time you have to recruit participants. In terms of timeline and budget that's listed on your research plan, you want to explain, you want to communicate to your stakeholders how much time each process is going to take and how much you will incentivize your participants. For the timeline, make sure to include some buffer time. Don't give yourself such strict deadlines. Give yourself at least a couple of days if it's a quick study, for buffer time, in case if some participants don't show up and you need to re-recruit, in case you have complicated data and you need to recruit even more participants because you cannot form insights, you cannot form themes from the already existing data that you have. So give yourself a little bit more buffer time, but it could look like this. For example, preparation is going to take this many days, recruitment is going to take this many days, interviews, I'm going to take this many days, analysis, and then I'm going to report the final research report on this date, again, with some buffer time. And for the budget, you can explain like we are going to give $30 Amazon gift card per participant, or we don't have budget. So we're going to ask participants to voluntarily participate. Therefore, we're going to ask them to participate in a shorter session because you can't really ask participants to come sit with you for an hour when you're not incentivizing them, versus if you are incentivizing them, you're more comfortable in asking such long time. So timeline and budget will help your stakeholders understand like when are you going to deliver, what you're going to deliver, and how much are we spending on this research. In terms of the session guide, I know we have a lot of text in the screen, but we'll go through them one by one. This is where you write your script and the questions you'll ask your participants. Earlier, we mentioned the research questions are not the questions you'll ask your participants. They are to communicate to your stakeholders what questions you'll get answers to with this research. But the session guide is where you can get creative and literally write down what you want to communicate to the participants if you want to. If you don't want to have a script, that's also fine. But it's always better to somehow outline couple of questions that you're going to ask your participants, and you can go like semi-scripted versus fully scripted, depending on how much flexibility you want to have in that conversation. You often start the session guide with an introduction where you explain who you are, what the research is about, what the research terms are about, asking participants for the consent for the recording. During the introduction, you should also give participants a chance to ask you questions before you start the session, after you start recording, just so you can capture what questions they're asking to you and also answer any confusions that they might have about the research and why you're doing it or who you're doing it with, like what are the goals with that research. They might have some questions that you want to clarify before diving into your asking them questions that is going to help you understand their needs, their motivations, etc. Then after the introduction, you start asking your research questions, the actual questions that you want to ask to your participants. Again, we'll get to how to ask these questions, how to form these questions in a minute later in this presentation. It's always better to start with a warm-up question. So ask them like, how was your day? Tell me a bit about yourself. Like, what do you do here for work? What are your hobbies? Try to make it relevant to your research, like theme and objectives, but like get them more comfortable because you want them to answer to you as open and as honest. So if they feel comfortable, they are likely to share more things with you. It's also crucial to be a good listener. Do not cut your participants' words. Let them finish your sentence. Give them some time after they finish their sentence to see if they want to add something else. And do not ask leading questions such as like, do you like doing this? Like, assuming that you like this, what would you do in this scenario? Like, those are leading questions. Try to avoid yes or no questions here. Try to ask like, instead of do you, try to ask like what and how questions. And if you have to ask do you, yes or no questions, try to follow up with like why, and please explain that a little bit more to me. When you're done with your questions to your participants, wrap it up by thanking them. Cover any additional information such as like when should they expect the incentive, where should they expect it, how to get in touch with you, that if they have more questions later on about this research that you're conducting, or if they're willing to participate in the future, that you can keep their information, if they will be willing to do that, etc. So this session guide is going to help you communicate with your users in a scripted and that like more organized way, which again, you can keep it semi-scripted or fully scripted. So I want to share an example template. I know we went through a lot, but I do have this template, which I will be sharing with you at the end as well. Like it's also attached to this presentation. It goes through how does the research plan look like, because we went through a lot of information here. So again, we have a background information. I won't read these again, but these are the examples that I wrote, but feel free to, I mean, you're going to change them according to what research you're conducting. These are the objectives, research questions based on each objective, the methodology that we spoke about, participants, number of participants, the criteria, the demographics, recruitment, and a screening survey, which we'll get to the screening survey template in a minute, timeline and budget, and the session guide. Here, I prepared you a session guide, which you can either use this or write yourself a completely new one, where you can like just change the yellow highlighted places to according to what you're doing, who you are, and what your research is, and ask your questions, insert your questions here, and then wrap it up. So in user interviews, this is the kind of a template that I use for session guide. Again, the session guide will change if you're conducting diary studies versus user interviews, but feel free to use this as your baseline, as a starting baseline. All right, that's what the research plan is. So research plan is very crucial in terms of starting either any methodology that you want to conduct with your users. But now we'll explore user interviews, and then we'll explore what usability tests are. In terms of user interviews, we'll go through what is a user interview, when to use user interviews, and how to conduct them. User interviews are generative research methodologies. Again, generative research methodologies, if you're not familiar with, are the ones that you focus on, like what people say rather than what people do, meaning that like they are focusing on user attitudes, they are focusing on what the users want, what the users feel, where are they getting concerned, where are they getting frustrated, what are their motivations are. So you explore those questions with generative research methodologies, and user interviews is one of them. With user interviews, you're having conversations with participants, as you probably know, and you're exploring attitudes, needs, wants, motivation, experiences. They are quick and easy method to collect information and can be combined with any other methodology such as survey. So you can either conduct an initial survey and then take like a couple participants from that survey and interview them further to ask more questions. You can conduct contextual inquiries with interviews. Contextual inquiry means observing participants use a product as you are in an interview with them. For example, you can ask them initial questions and then ask them, hey, can you share your screen and show me how you actually do that? You can do it with diary studies, follow-up diary studies with interviews to ask them follow-up questions based on the answers that they published on the diary studies. So interviews are very flexible, very useful. You can use it at any stage of the product roadmap, product life cycle. You can use it at the beginning, like when you don't really have an idea about what you're going to do with your product. You can use it at the end when you're like extremely comfortable with your product. You have a solid product, but you still want to explore some more things. You want to explore what other features you want to add to your product. User interviews are very flexible and very useful in your UX research as a methodology that you can use it with almost any methodology, combine it with, and you can use it at almost every single step of that product life cycle. As mentioned, they can incorporate it to the study throughout the entire product life cycle. Like you can use it during the initial discovery before even you have a product to test, just to see if the problem space is actually existing. You can test your concept, like you can explore what other features you want to add in your product. You can follow up usability tests or other evaluative methods with that, or you can just constantly understand customer needs and expectations through iterative user interviews with users. In terms of how to conduct it, I want to first share its limitations because we talked about its pros, and now let's talk about its cons. most of the time what participants say is not what they actually do. They might actually tell you that, oh, this is how I feel, but in that setting, in that real life, they might not exactly feel that way. So you might want to follow up user interviews with other methodologies to understand if what you're hearing is actually what's happening. They might leave out crucial information or skip details during the interviews, or they might not willing to talk much. You might need to keep asking why and follow up questions to a participant, and they might still not want to give you much information. So you might need more participants to understand what's happening. Some participants might talk about irrelevant topics, and you might not have time to ask actual questions to users. So it's important to learn how to conduct user interviews in that case. It's about learning. It requires good listening and diversion skills. In case if they're talking about something else that's really irrelevant to your research, you want to divert the conversation back to the topic, but also you want to be a good listener. You want to give them a chance to speak and explain and be comfortable with speaking with you. And you often deal with large amount of qualitative data that requires a long time to analyze. So I believe you have a workshop coming about how to analyze qualitative data. User interviews will give you lots of qualitative data, especially if you're conducting an hour and a half sessions with per participant. So that's another limitation, that you might want to give enough time into analysis section for you to be able to analyze the data the best. In terms of number of participants that you need for this is user interviews. Sorry, 1 second. I don't want to confuse you. For user interviews, according to best practices, recruiting 7 to 10 participants per user segment for user interviews is great. For example, what I mean by user segment, if you are exploring what your users feel, need, want, etc., but you want to focus on like families as well as college students, you have 2 different user segments. So you want to recruit 7 to 10 participants from families, 7 to 10 participants from college students, to identify how much difference they have, how much similarity they have per research. So that's what I mean by per user segment. And in qualitative research, number of participants is decided by the point at which saturation is reached, meaning when the insights themes are emerged. So for example, if you interviewed 5 participants and you heard similar things, you have very strongly formed themes emerging, you can actually make analysis from what you heard with those 5 participants. You don't need 7 to 10 participants, or vice versa. If you have not heard enough strong themes from the 7 to 10 participants, you might want to recruit more participants to see if what is happening. Why are you keep hearing different things versus why are you not hearing like the similar things from the similar users criteria that you're recruiting? So you should always start with small, then increase the sample size as you go, just in case if the saturation is reached earlier at the point versus later. And in terms of recruiting participants, once the stakeholders and you decide on the participant criteria, you need to create a screening survey. A screening survey will help you eliminate non-qualified respondents and connect with the qualifying participants only. If you have enough budget, you can share it with the third-party participants. As I mentioned earlier, you can share it on user testing, you can share it at respondent.io and pay them to recruit the participants for you. This is a quick and secure way of recruiting participants because they have a huge data of people willing to attend the research study, and they can screen participants on behalf of you, which is a much quicker way than doing it manually. But if you don't have the budget, you can ask your company to connect you with the potential participants. If your potential participants are, for example, currently existing users, you can ask your company, can you give me their email so I can send them the email of the screening survey? Or you can share your screener with even family and friends if they qualify, on Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, Slack groups, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So I want to go through an example of a screening survey and how it looks like. So for the screening survey, you want to introduce what you're doing. You want to not give away too much, just so people do not try to pass the screening survey to participate in your session, especially if you're giving incentive. Be careful with that. You don't want to give too much, but you don't want to give nothing. You want to tell them like, we are conducting research to understand users' preferences in our platform. Want to participate? Here's how much we're giving to those who are selected to participate. And here how much this screening survey is going to take. Please fill it out for us. And then you start with your questions. You initially start with the screening questions that you decided with your stakeholders about, like how old they are, where do they live, how much do they spend on your product, how, like which features do they use. Depends on the like criteria that you decided with your stakeholders in the research plan under the participants. This is what you ask them, and this is like how you recruit, how you screen them, how you select the qualifying participants from the unqualifying. And then always ask diversity questions. Keep the diversity questions as optional. Do not force participants to answer these questions, but always ask like diversity questions and try to recruit participants from diverse backgrounds. That's why you're asking them. So explain the participants like, this is why we're asking it to you, to get as diverse of participants as possible. So if you answer them, that's great for us. We'll try to get as diverse participants as possible from the qualifying participants. And then include your consent form here. Consent form is going to tell them like, this study is going to be confidential. We are asking you to give your permission to record our study. We will not be sharing your name or information with anyone. We will not be asking any personal identifying questions, etc. Like insert your consent form on your screener survey and make sure that that consent form is a must answer. So people who don't consent are automatically eliminated even before you try to reach out to them. So you're saving time with this. And then you end it with an exit message saying that we'll reach out to you if you qualify. Thank you so much for that. Again, doing it manually will take more time, more effort. You're going to have to go back to your data, go back to the responses of the screening survey and how to select the ones who qualify, reach out to them, schedule their sessions. That takes a lot of time. So give yourself enough time for recruitment. But if your company has enough budget, definitely try to use third parties. That's a very quick and easy way to recruit participants. But you still need the screening survey to prepare for the third parties. And during the interviews, the questions that we're going to ask and how to actually conduct user interviews. Again, the participants need to trust you to share as much information as they need. So try to be friendly, try to help them relax, ask them warm-up questions, try to tell them that you're not testing their knowledge. There's no right or wrong answer. You're only interested in their thoughts and feelings about certain aspects of your product or a problem that they are experiencing in the world. Try to ask them some fun personal questions at the beginning to get them relaxed, as mentioned. It's also crucial to avoid that yes or no questions or leading questions. Try to ask them follow-up questions if you do ask yes or no questions. Ask them like, tell me about the last time you did this. Describe where you did that. Try to frame your questions with how and what or where do you and yes or no. And even though most participants will consent to a recording, take notes during the session. It's very important because it will help your analysis process a lot. If you can't take notes while conducting interviews, because it takes a lot of practice to be able to get there, ask a team member to observe your session. This also helps your stakeholders to come and empathize with your users. Like ask a designer to say, come, like, can you take notes? And at the same time, you can observe what participants say, which will help them to actually understand those users' insights that you will later present to them even better because they are there while you're doing the interviews. So this will help you with note taking as well. Again, these are the interview questions. I do have one more template here. For example, some good research questions during the warm-up are like, tell me about your work. How was your weekend? Some digging in questions. When was the last time you did this? What happened? Tell me how you currently do this, by avoiding leading and yes or no questions. For example, have you used any other tools to solve this? What is your current budget to do that on this? So try to ask them questions that are actually trying to get them give you as much insight as possible. And here I attached some of the resources that you can use to ask the best questions in your user interview sessions. They also have examples here. You can try to see if they can apply to your research study, or you can try to adapt it to yourself and learn more what research questions are good questions, user interview questions, and what user interview questions are not so good questions. But I will not spend more time on it for now for the sake of time. Moving on to usability testings. Again, I can imagine some of you have some questions about what we went through. We went through a lot of information, but I'll answer them at the end. In terms of usability testing, what is the usability testing? How is it different than user interviews? When do we use usability testing, and how to conduct the usability testing? Usability testing is an evaluative research methodology rather than generative, which is focusing on what do people do, which gives you a good chance of assessing your products, usability products, how it works in real life with the users. Does it work? Does some features not work? So you kind of evaluate your product rather than understand your users with usability testing and other evaluative methodologies. It's one of the most commonly used methodologies, usability testing, with user interviews, of course, where you test the usability of your product with your target audience. You can ask participants to complete tasks on your product or the prototype you have if you don't have a product yet, and analyze those usability problems. And before you launch a design, before you launch a new feature, before you actually spend time and money on those product roadmap steps, if you conduct that usability testing, that's going to help you identify, okay, these are the things that we need to change before the launch, before we actually hand this product to the participants, to the users in the real time. They can be conducted in every stage of the product lifecycle, just like user interviews. You can start conducting usability testings as soon as you have a lo-fi prototype, that MVP. Or you can test it with the currently existing products. You can test it with the apps that you already have on your phone, or you can test it during the entire life cycle of that product development. How is it different than user interviews? As mentioned, user interviews is a generative methodology. You understand users with user interviews. You talk to them and you ask them questions about, like, how do you feel about this? What do you do in this? But usability testing is an evaluative research methodology, meaning that you identify the problems, you assess your product's usability. What is working in your product? What is not? What features are working? Can people actually do search in your product? Or is the search functionality not working? How is it not working? So that's the difference. That's the biggest difference. Unlike user interviews, usability testings will help you understand which tasks participants can complete successfully and which task they fail at. Identify and clear your design language and features. Evaluate how much time participants spend on each task. Do participants take a long time trying to find where they create an account? Then you probably want to make it easier to find. Identify any changes and improvements you need to make to your product, and determine user satisfaction with your product. So that's what this difference between usability testing and user interview is. When to conduct usability testings? You can conduct it as soon as you have an MVP, as soon as you have the minimum viable product, even with a lo-fi prototype. Lo-fi prototype, I mean, is like paper prototype, where users are like tapping on a paper and you're switching papers, just so that you can understand, like, how do users' mental models work, or before making any design decisions, before doing any launch, before spending time and money and resources on a future launch or any product decision. The main difference, and usability testings can conducted moderatedly and unmoderatedly. The main difference between moderated and unmoderated usability testing is that with moderated, you meet with the participants in person or remotely, and you guide them through the tasks. You either, like in a remote session, what I usually do is, like, I share my screen, give them access control to my screen, and ask them to interact with that prototype that I'm sharing with them, or the product. And I guide them, like, do this task now, show me how you would do this task. But in unmoderated testings, I publish those questions on a website, attach the link, and the participants take those tests at their own time, at their own schedule. So I'm not there as a researcher to guide them through the tasks. Rather, they're reading the tasks one by one and showing me how they complete it by recording their screen and sending me the recording afterwards. So that's the biggest difference between moderated and moderated. I'm going to get get to pros and cons of each moderated versus unmoderated usability testings now. So moderated ones are, as mentioned, like real-time interviews that you are having a conversation with participants about the usability task. They are more beneficial in early stages because your prototypes tend to be more lo-fi. Your prototypes tend to be more confusing. They have less functionality. Not every button will work. So those can get confusing to participants in an unmoderated setting because they don't have anyone to ask questions what's happening when they get confused. So it's better to use moderated testings during the early stages of your product. But it's better for observing participant behavior as well. Like you can get clues from like if participants having difficulty completing one task over other. But moderated testings take more time and budget. You need to actually invest more time by sitting with each participant one by one. And you need to pay them a little bit more for sitting with you rather than doing the testing at their own time, at their own space. Moderated testings take less time and less budget, but it's where you post your study online at a platform such as usertesting.com, userzoom.com, and have participants record their task completions at their own time and environment. As mentioned, they're cheaper and they require less time. However, since you submit the questions in advance, there's no room to ask follow-up questions. There's no room to, like, if a participant is confused at a place, you can't really be there to correct them. So they might get confused. If they confuse about the second task, that could affect their entire testing session until they complete it. So they might not be able to complete it successfully just because they got stuck at the second task. So those are the cons of unmoderated testing, that you're not there to help your participants adjust and also ask them follow-up questions. But the unmoderated testings are the quick and messy way of testing. Like, for example, if I get a request from my team about like a product's functionality that they want to test, I can post it on a user Zoom or user testing website, get answers in a day, analyze it in a day, and send them to the results again in a day, which takes like 2 to 3 days in total, versus moderated ones. I need to like recruit participants, schedule sessions with them, conduct the sessions with them, which might take a couple of weeks instead of a couple of days, like unmoderated testings. How to conduct it? Number of participants. According to, again, NN Group, you need 5 users in most usability testings. Again, you might need more or less, but the best results come from no more than 5 user testings. And if you look at this chart, most of the usability problems, we start to hear the similar ones by the time we reach like the 5th participants. And when you come to 6, 7, 10, 15 participants, you don't really hear new usability issues. You just keep hearing the repetitive issues, which you already heard. So therefore, you don't really need to do it with more than that many participants. But if you haven't heard strong, like similar usability issues with 5 participants, for sure, you need to conduct it with more participants. But if the saturation that we already mentioned is reached already with 5 participants or less, you can cut the study at that point. Usually in usability testings, the saturation is reached by the time you get to the 5th participants. Then you start hearing the same usability issues, which you're ready to report at that point. And any fewer participants than 5 probably will mislead you. Because some usability testings for some participants will happen by accident. For example, one participant might be not as tech literate. So if you just report the usability testing results only based on 2 participants, then you probably might not be addressing the right usability issues that the mass majority of your users will have on your product. So therefore, we say at least 5, but probably no, you won't need more than 5 in usability testings. In terms of recruiting participants, again, you can follow the same path as you would do for user interviews. You can either post it on third-party channels to have them recruited for you, which is more budget, which takes more budget, but it's time costs. It saves time. Sorry, or you can do it yourself by posting your screener survey at the channels that are appropriate. For unmoderated studies, you can follow the same strategy as moderated studies, but you can also post it on user testing or userzoom.com and have them literally take your testing right after they got recruited. So it's a very quick way. If you're conducting unmoderated usability testings, I really recommend using the third party. If you're conducting moderated testings, you can, depending on your budget, you can recruit them yourselves. In terms of preparation, the research plan that we earlier mentioned stays the same. You still follow through all those steps, but you try to focus on understanding what your stakeholders want to test. Under your objectives, write down what you want to test. Under your research questions, write down the questions based on the tasks that you want your participants to take on. Define what metrics you'll be testing. Are you testing like how fast users can find something, or how successful users can complete tasks on your platform, or any other testing that you're deciding with your stakeholders on this research about what metrics you're gonna focus on. Collaborate with the design team to finalize the materials, like finalize the prototype. Are we doing a lo-fi prototype? Are we doing hi-fi interactive prototype? Ask your designer to go through that prototype with you a couple of times, so you're very familiar with it, so you can prepare the best session guide questions for your participants. Or are you using a working product? Like, make sure that you are very well aware of what you're using, and if it's a new prototype, if it's a new feature, make sure your designers, your teams have practiced it with you, just so you are very well aware of what you're testing, so you can ask and help participants when they have a question or when they get confused. And prepare the order of your questions. Which task is going to come first? Which task is going to come after? Make sure that you spend enough time on preparation for that. On top of the research plan that we already went through, these are the things that you want to focus on usability testings. The questions. You want to explain participants that you're not testing their knowledge of. You are testing the product's usability. Make sure you tell them that today we want to evaluate our product's usability. We're not testing you, we're testing our product. There's no right or wrong answer. So they don't feel guilty, or they don't feel bad about themselves when they get stuck at a task or when they fail at a task. Tell them that it's not their fault, it's a prototype, it's a product, and that's what we are testing. And them having issues actually helps you to identify and fix that product for them later on. Like, explain this very well to them. If you're working with a prototype, tell the participants that not everything is going to work as expected. Some buttons might not be working. You might not be able to click everywhere. You might not be able to scroll indefinitely. It's a working prototype. Please be aware of that throughout the study. Encourage participants to speak out loud as they complete the task. Don't just let participants show you what they're doing. Encourage them to talk out loud as they're doing. Like, tell them, while you're searching for how to create an account, tell me why you're clicking on where you're clicking. Tell me where you're looking at, where you're looking to find that account creation button. Ask them to talk out loud as they're doing each task throughout the study. You can also do this in unmoderated settings by writing this under each task. For example, task 1, task 2, task 3. Under each task, make sure to include please talk out loud. Please talk out loud, because participants are going to forget to talk out loud. It's very important to keep iterating that. Please explain as you're going through this product and tasks. Ensure to provide context to participants for each task without giving away too much, and lead them to build mental models. For example, tell them, imagine that you want to add items to your cart. How do you do that? Assuming you want to create an account on this platform, please show me how you would do that. Give them the context that they might want to use this product in, and ask them to complete the task according to those contexts. Follow up after each questions with if the participants believe they completed the task successfully, and if the task was easy or hard for them. Do this after each question, each task. Like, do you think you completed the task successfully? Yes or no? Easy. How hard was the task for you? From 1 to 5. 1 being very easy, 5 being very hard. Let them rate each task like this, so you'll have an idea of like which features you want to focus on spending more time in reiterating versus which features are already working well for the participants. And in moderated settings, do not help participants to complete the tasks. Let them figure it out. Let them make the mistakes. Tell them that it's okay to make the mistakes, but let them do it. If a participant fails a task, and if that task is crucial for you to move on to the next task, like if they have to complete it successfully before moving to the next task, then at the end of they fail, you can show them, oh, this is actually how you do it, but this is not your fault that you couldn't figure it out. It is our prototype that we are trying to improve right now, but this is how you do it at this point. Let's move on to the next task. In a non-moderated study, explain after the participants answer how easy or hard was the task for them, like after completing the task, even if they fail or even if they succeed, explain the task's pathway, just so they're aware of that's how that's how the success case would work for that task, so they can actually do it when you're not there to guide them before moving to the next task, so they are able to complete the entire study rather than getting stuck on the task 2 or task 3. Again, I do have an article here that I like to share with you. It's for those who are completing usability testing for the first time, how to test, what questions you can ask, what are the tasks that you can give. It's a great example and great script that you can follow. And they have a template that you can also read for first time testing usability, first time doing usability studies. To wrap up, I know I talked a lot. I'll give you time to ask me questions, but to wrap up, I want to go through when to use which methodology one more time before getting into the questions. According to the NN group, this is a map that shows where generative methodologies lay and where evaluative methodologies lay. Behavioral are the evaluative methodologies, attitudinal are the generative methodologies. Generative methodologies, again, focus on users' needs, wants, feelings, frustrations, like you want to understand users, versus behavioral is like how they use your platform, how they actually do the things that you're trying to explore them to do. So feel free to refer to this article, which explains which methods you can use for what kind of questions you have, depending on your stakeholders' questions, the objectives that you have. It directs you greatly about which methodology to pick for what kind of questions, what kind of objectives that you might have for that study. Because interviews and usability testings are not always the answer, the best answer at least, to find answers to your objectives and your research questions. Okay, I talked a lot. I'll share this presentation with you all with all the link and all the resources that I referred to while preparing this presentation. But I am ready to take any questions that you might have right now.
So the first one is, when you're recruiting participants and getting people to know, and you're getting people that you know to sign up for the testings or the research, would that be considered a conflict of interest for an ethics standpoint, since you have some sort of relationship with them?
So I assume this question is asking, like, not recruiting people that you already know while
Exactly.
For your studies, right? No, it's just people you know might not give you as critical information, as critical feedback as you might want to get. So as long as they fit the criteria that you decided with your stakeholders, as long as they actually qualify to participate in your study, you are feel free to use them. They're free resources. They're perfect. That you can ask them more time because you know them. You can give them no money because you know them and they are voluntarily going to participate in your study. Just be aware of the fact that they might not give you as honest as critical feedback that you need, or they might assume that you know them enough, so they might not tell you enough about what they want, what they feel, etc. So there are pros and cons of recruiting people that you already know. If you don't have any budget, perfect, do that as long as they qualify. Again, I can't restate this enough. As long as they qualify, feel free to use them as resources, but make sure that they are aware of the fact that you're doing a professional study. They're supposed to answer you honestly. They're supposed to think that you don't know them. Tell them all this information beforehand if you are going to recruit friends and family or any people that you might know. Or for example, sometimes you're testing an internal tool and you're recruiting your company's employees. They might not want to be judgmental to the companies because tools, just because they're a little shy or they're feeling hesitant, let them know that it's all anonymous. Let them know that nothing is going to be shared with their names under it. We are going to give them participant numbers. Try to get them as comfortable as you can if you're recruiting people that you know.
Yeah, for sure. The next question would be, what are some ways, I know you've already mentioned a few that, you can find participants for the studies. I know it's a pretty tough thing to answer because, it's pretty tough to find participants. So, yeah.
So I'll give you a couple examples. So for this challenge, for example, we don't have much budget, right? We are all learning, so we don't have like a company paying $600 for us to recruit participants in real world. Therefore, what you can do is join Slack channels, join LinkedIn groups, join Facebook groups, and try to share your screener, then explain them that you're doing a study as part of a challenge. A lot of people actually are willing to help. But if your company has budget, again, you can use third-party websites and the products such as usertesting.com, userzoom.com. But if you don't have budget, you can do that. For example, I'll give you an example. When I was doing a project with people with visual impairment, I sent my screener survey to nonprofit organizations that support people and work with blind people. They shared most of them did not even respond to me. 2 of them shared my screener survey in their newsletter, and I got enough participants to work with. When I was working with a company that was working on a product for dog owners, I joined every single Facebook dog owner group I'm still part of. I shared my screener there by asking the admin permission. I joined Reddit groups and shared my screener there, and I got participants from there. And then I asked them, do you have a friend that I can also interview with? And they would give me their information. So those are the creative ways that you can get more participants when you don't have much budget to spend on recruitment.
Yeah. Another question is, is the usability test only focused on usability issues, or can it be used for other purposes? For example, validate if the product direction is right or wrong.
Depends on the product direction that you mentioned here. It is usability tests are about like how successfully can participants do the tasks that we are hoping them to do on our platform. We recently, let's say, created a new feature, search functionality. We recently added in our product. Can they find where it is? Can they actually successfully search? When they search, does the search functionality give them responses that they expected to get? How satisfied are they with this functionality? Those kind of questions are the ones that you can answer with usability tests. If you want to understand, like, what else do users want from your product? What are they hoping to get from your product? That's for user interviews. That's when you are trying to understand their motivations, right? That's when you're trying to understand the new concepts that you might want to explore with your product team. Those are for user interviews rather than usability testings.
Yeah, so it could be like 2 different sets of questions all at once, like usability testing and then some more questions. Okay, and then what is the best platform to conduct remote usability testing?
So usertesting.com and userzoom.com are my favorites. User testing is a little bit more expensive tool for companies. Therefore, for example, at BuzzFeed, we use UserZoom. And those are great because they do have a great database of already existing users that they can share the screener with. And I usually, whenever I post the usability testing, I usually get responses within a day and complete the study within a day. One thing that I forgot to mention about usability testing is if you're posting an unmoderated study, make sure to launch a test study with 1 or 2 people before you actually launch it with 5 to 7 people or however participant you're going to get, just to see if your prototype is actually working on the user's end, if the questions that you're asking are clear to users. Adjust it and then launch the actual study, like do a test run and then run the actual study. But going back to the question, some of my favorite platforms are usertesting.com and userzoom.com for unmoderated studies. For remote usability testing in moderated studies, I usually invite participants on Zoom or on Google Meets. I either send them the prototype link and ask them to share their screen so I could follow it, or I share my own screen on Zoom and give them remote access so they can control it, so they don't need to learn how to share a screen, how to click on my prototypes link, and I can easily like end the screen share whenever I want to, because it's all in my control. So you can use Zoom, you can use Google Meets for moderated ones.
If while doing the research, things don't go as the research planned, what do you think you can do?
What do you mean by things don't go as research plan? Whoever
she says maybe due to findings from the research.
So you mean like your research is not actually answering actually validating the assumptions that you already made with your people, or you're not hearing, or do you mean that you're not hearing what you're hoping to hear from users? Can you explain this a little bit, whoever wrote this question?
Hi, this is Manika. So what I meant was like the methodologies that we list in the research plan. While we are doing it, if we find if those are not validating the assumptions that we made previously, but they are giving the like totally different findings, for which we might need to change a few methods that we do after that.
So to be honest, those are my best favorite studies. If you're hearing things that are not matching with your assumptions, like if you assume that participants would answer you in one way versus they're answering you in a different way, perfect, because that means that your team has a lot of learning to do and they're going to value your research even more. If you mean that your method is, the selected method is not working, you're actually not getting, like your participants are not really targeting the research questions that you're trying to ask them with that methodology, cut the research at that point, propose another methodology. For example, if user interviews aren't answering you and you want to do a diary study, ask your company or your team, like if you can switch the diary studies with the same recruited participants, ask them if they will be willing to participate in a diary study versus the user interview that you initially asked them to do. If I'm understanding your question correctly, that's what I would do. But let me know if you're trying to ask something else that I'm not answering you directly.
Yeah, I think I'm clear. Like, then in that case, we should like reroute to some other method and communicate that with the stakeholder.
Yeah, you can reroute for sure. That's why you have the buffer time, right? Like that's what I mentioned, like with the timeline. If participants don't show up, if anything goes wrong with the research, make sure you give yourself a week or so buffer time, at least a couple days, just in case if things don't go wrong and you might need to adjust things accordingly.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
We have maybe two more questions. What's the best practice for usability testing Excel template? I'm assuming, for, collecting data, like how or where would you put the information that you gathered?
So I think you're going to have a workshop about how to evaluate qualitative research analysis, how to do that analysis and synthesis. I usually do an affinity diagramming. I know it might be a new term to you, but you're going to get to that with the next workshop, I assume. Or what you do is like if you're testing quantitative metrics such as like success rates, such as the time spent on each task. Again, you can use Excel sheet, you can use Airtable, you can use Notion, and that's how you can report that data back. But for most qualitative research that I do, I usually analyze my data by using affinity diagramming or qualitative coding, which will take a long time to explain at this point. But if you reach out to me, I can send you some resources about what qualitative coding and affinity diagramming is. I'll write my email address here as well.
And then I don't know if you've already answered this, but user research plan template.
Yes. So again, let me go through the resources. So under this research plan, there are these two resources will give you templates. This is the template that I use and I benefit from. This is my structure basically that I'm sharing you with. This is linked in this presentation under the research plan section. Let me find it right here. This template that I showed you here that I personally use for user interviews and usability testings is posted here, but the resources that I publish at the very end on the 36th slide also gives you good research templates, that these are like great researchers that I follow in the industry, that I rely on their resources as well.
Joe A asks, how do you come up with assumptions?
So that's a great question. I actually have an article about that on Medium. Let me share. If you reach out to me, I'll share it with you. You can come up with assumptions during the kickoff session with your stakeholders. You can do a kickoff workshop with your stakeholders to understand what assumptions do they have about users and the problem space that you're targeting with this research, or you can do it more less formally in a Zoom meeting with them and ask them what assumptions they have. For example, if you're testing users' needs about adding the search functionality in your product, let's say, you can assume that users will search this topics A, B, C more than C, D, E, and the things that comes up, users expected in this way versus the other way. You do write your assumptions in that way. What is your product's biggest risk? What do you already know about users? What do you think users would like and will do in your product? And then you try to evaluate that with this research questions and objectives in your research plan. So I do come up with them with my team in collaboration, either through a workshop or just a less formal meeting on Zoom.
Vanessa's asking, how can we find the most appropriate methods to use when it comes to methods, so as to reduce the possibility of changing to another method later on? So
that's when I'm going to direct you to this NN Group's article. This article, as well as the other articles there, that helps you understand. First of all, you need to understand, is your research generative or evaluative? Then, based on the research questions and the research objectives you have, you find the best methodology. If it's evaluative, do you need a usability testing versus do you want more like A/B testing? Are you testing two different versions of a product versus are you trying to understand what issues does one product already has? For example, in terms of generative research, research methodologies, based on your goals and your research questions, again, are you trying to understand what users are doing in a long period of time? For example, you want to observe their behavior and understand their behavior in 5 days in real time, versus are you trying to understand how the users react to possible new concepts coming into your research versus what their needs are, what their wants are, what their goals are. So first decide if it's an evaluative research or a generative research. Then, based on your objectives and the research questions, you find the most appropriate methodology. If you're not familiar with all the methodologies, feel free to refer to NN Group articles or any other research articles that are out there to get familiar with the most used methodologies like interviews, focus groups, contextual inquiries, diary studies, concept testings, surveys, and then you'll be able to evaluate like, okay, my generative research questions will be able to get answered the best way if I do interviews and a follow-up survey afterwards.
You were talking about survey, but there is a question about survey. When you're doing generative research to better understand your users for a prototype you're creating, when might you do a survey before using interview versus doing user interviews first or as the only method?
So you might want to do a survey if you need answers about, first of all, if you want more quantitative answers, rather than more qualitative, more open-ended answers, but also if you want a large amount of users' answers. So if you can't really decide in one direction or another, and your team is asking you to understand what the majority of the users want, then that's when you might want to refer to surveys. Or if you only have a couple questions to users, if you don't have like a 30-minute, 60-minute interview worth questions, you might want to refer to surveys and do a quick survey with some open-ended and some quantitative questions. But if you have more extensive questions, you might want to do interview. Or if you have some questions about like, how much do users come to your product? Which features do they want to use? Do they often use it from your product? Which features do they not use from your product and why? You can launch this on a survey and then get a couple users from that, like get 200, 300 responses. And then you can take 5 to 7 users, 7 to 10 users from those respondents and do an interview about why and explore the reasoning behind their answers further. So that way you'll have like a great understanding of what is happening with the survey and then why is happening with the interview. That's when you might want to combine them versus when you might not want to combine them. I hope this answers your question.
And then we have a final question, which is, how do we validate if the usability test study that we have done was indeed done well? I mean, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. So your usability test done well is not evaluated by how much people failed versus how much people succeeded in the tasks. That doesn't define if your usability testing was done correctly or not. It's great if you're discovering that people are failing. I love when I see people are failing, or I love when I see that my assumptions and the team's assumptions are not being validated with my research studies. So that means that my research is going to be valued more because the team is going to learn something new. So don't be afraid that if people are failing, if participants are failing on most of the tasks. What you want to focus on to create a good usability testing is to word your questions well, ask follow-up questions, make sure the tasks, if a participant can't complete one task, they can still move on to another task. Make sure that it is clear, make sure that they can follow the usability test comfortably without you actually guiding them necessarily. Make sure that you ask them if they could complete the task successfully or not. So those things will help you create a good usability test, but the participants failing at tasks doesn't define if your usability test was done well or not. It is about your product's usability, if it's good or bad. So which is like, if they're failing, I love it more personally, because that means that I am bringing my team more valuable information about what we should do next.
Yeah, it's about finding that, you're testing and you're seeing how it's doing as a test. So yeah. The last question is, what is the role of UX researcher in a company or a team? What does a UX researcher have to do in real life work? I guess it's maybe talking a little more about what do you do on a daily basis, and
yeah, I can explain. So to give you a bit more general understanding, is user researchers are the voice of users. What happens is that, like, in a meeting, designers bring design decisions, product managers bring product decisions, engineers bring developing decisions, and you bring users' voice. You tell them that users want this, they don't want that. Users will be able to use this, but not this. In this setting, users are motivated by this, but unmotivated, get discouraged by that. So you are basically the user's voice. According to day-to-day, how I work is I meet with the product teams, understand what their current product decisions are, what they're working on, what products they're working on, what features they're working on, what is upcoming. And then I propose them research plans, saying that, like, if we incorporate research here, we will be able to learn from users about this, and that, which can help improve or redirect our product direction, and help us build better products. So then I go meet with them, do workshops with them, plan my research, conduct my research, report them my analysis and findings, and then I follow up with them afterwards, like, what more research questions that this previous research has made you think of? How else I can help you in the next sprint of your product lifecycle? What are you going to work on next that I can help you with user research? That's going to give you the understanding of what users want, what users need, or how users use this product. So that's what the role of UX researcher is at a company.
I would say this is actually amazing. Whatever Yagmur has shown, like everything, like all the information, like everything from planning. Planning is very important. I really thank you for that. Like you covered that part also, which is like very, like in this particular challenge they are working on different research methodologies and all those things and all, but they are not aware of that, like which one we should go ahead, should we consider all the methodologies or something like that. But this is a right direction for them to choose a right methodologies and move ahead with the research and then work on the analysis.
Hey everyone, on behalf of IterateUX, we would like to thank you so much for watching this week's event. If you like the content, please leave a like and subscribe. We'll have events every Thursday at 5:30 Pacific Time. Join our Discord in the description to find out more.